welcome and thank you. I really appreciate all of you taking the time to come and watch me perform this. I first off want to thank Evan Williams for initiating this. It was his idea to have me perform this. It's been 5 years or more since I have performed it, and so there was a lot of scraping the rust off. And with that leads me to thank my wife Corey, who is here, who is going to be reading book just in case I fall off track and don't remember things. I may need a line or two, and hopefully I will not. When I was in 4th or 5th grade, I found that I really enjoyed memorizing poems, particularly the story poems like Gunga Din or Casey at the Bat or Charge of the Light Brigade. And one of the reasons that I liked to memorize these poems is I have dyslexia. Who knows how severe, but enough so that reading is difficult. And poetry is really difficult because mostly all of my energy is figuring out what the words are rather than get the cadence. But I discovered about that time that if I memorized the poem, I could then go off and do it any way I wanted, whatever pacing, whatever accent, whatever I wanted. Many years later, I think it was 1990, I found myself stranded at the City Lights bookstore in San Francisco. Now, if you're like me, being stranded in a bookstore is not a horrible thing, as Corey put it. You called it sweet torture, I think, for us bibliophiles. And I came across a volume of The Wasteland. It's a small, slim volume. I have several of them over there. Now, I had heard of it. I didn't know much about it, and I certainly hadn't read it, so I opened it up, said, hey, I've memorized poems, let's look at this. It was absolutely incomprehensible. I could not make heads or tails of that thing, and I paged through, and I looked at the back, and it had line numbers, and the end of the poem, it ended at line 434. I thought, there is no way I could memorize this. And then, as the character, if anyone watches How I Met Your Mother, the character Barney Stinson might say, challenge accepted. And so from that period of time on, I started working on it. It was about 5 years before I finally had it completed, not that I spent the entire time working on it. The poem is made up of 5 parts. As I said before, very fragmented, and I found it very difficult to memorize, so I started to research it. Everything I said is one of the best poems in the 20th century. Okay, it might be if I could actually understand it, but that's separate. It also said that the original title to this poem was He Do the Police in Different Voices. Now that's a quote from Charles Dickens' Our Mutual Friend. The widow Betty Higgins is describing her son Sloppy and said, "You mightn't think it, but Sloppy is a beautiful reader of newspapers. He do the police in different voices." Now there are 2 things that I took away from this that I want to share with you. Item 1, imagine the front page of a newspaper has lots of articles, and you go read 1, continued on B5, read B5 and finish. That's one way to read the newspaper. Alternatively, you could simply read article to article, and it would come across very fragmented, but it would give you a wash, a feeling of the time. Item 2 about the quote is, like Sloppy, I decided it would help me if I read the poem, the different characters in different voices. And so I am going to do that for you. In fact, the goal for me of doing The Wasteland is to make it understandable for you and hopefully enjoyable. One last thing before I begin. He uses many different languages, almost all in English, fortunately. But I wanted to say that because I wanted to apologize in advance for my atrocious accent and pronunciations. I only translate the first piece in the front before the poem actually begins. And with that, I present to you The Wasteland by T.S.Eliot. Nam sibilam quidam cume ego ipse oculis meus vidian impule pendere, ecumere parere dicolant civilati theleis, respondabat epathanello thello. Translation. For once I saw with my own eyes the Sibyl of Cumae hanging in a cage, and when the boy said, "Sibyl, what do you want?" she replied, "I want to die." for Ezra Pound, Il Miglior Fabbro. One, the burial of the dead. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. Summer surprised us. Coming over the Starnberger Sea with a shower of rain, we stopped in the colonnade and went on in sunlight, into the Hofgarten and drank coffee and talked for an hour. Bin gar kein Russen, stem aus Litauen, echt Deutsch. And when we were children staying at the Archduke's, my cousins, he took me out on a sled and I was frightened. He said, Marie, Marie, hold on tight, and down we went. In the mountains there you feel free. I read much in the night and go south in the winter. What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? Son of man, you cannot say or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images where the sun beats, and the dead tree gives no shelter, the cricket no relief, and the dry stone no sound of water. Only there is shadow under this red rock. Come in under the shadow of this red rock, and I'll show you something different. From either your shadow striding to meet you in the morning, or your shadow at evening rising to meet you. I'll show you fear and a handful of dust. You brought me hyacinths first a year ago. They called me the hyacinth girl. Yet, when you came back late from the hyacinth garden, your arms full and your hair wet, I could not speak and my eyes failed. I was neither living nor dead, and I knew nothing looking into the heart of light. The silence. Odin Lear Dasmir. Madame Sesostris, famous clairvoyant, had a bad cold. Nevertheless, is known to be the wisest woman in Europe, with a wicked pack of cards. Here, said she, is your card, the drowned Phoenician sailor. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Look. Here is Belladonna, the lady of the rocks, the lady of situations. Here's the man with 3 staves, and here's the wheel. And here's the one-eyed merchant. And this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I am forbidden to see. I do not find the hanged man. Fear death by water. I see crowds of people walking round in a ring. Now, thank you. And if you see dear Mrs. Aquatone, tell her I bring the horoscope myself. One must be so careful these days. Unreal City. Under the brown fog of a winter dawn, a crowd flowed over London Bridge. So many. I had not thought death had undone so many. Sighs, short and infrequent, were exhaled, and each man fixed his eyes before his feet. Flowed up the hill and down King William Street to where St. Mary Woolnoth kept the hours with a dead sound on the final stroke of 9. There I saw one I knew and called him, Stetson, you were with me at the Ships at Miley. That corpse you planted last year in your garden, has it begun to sprout? Will it bloom this year, or has the sudden frost disturbed its bed? Oh, keep the dog far hence. That's friend to men, or with his nails and dig it up again. You hypocrite lecture, mon semblant, mon frère. Two, a game of chess. The chair she sat in, like a burnished throne, glowed in the marble, where the glass, held up by standards wrought with fruited vine, from which a golden Cupidon peeped out, another hid his eyes behind his wing, doubled the flames of 7-branched candelabra, reflecting light upon the table as the glitter from her jewels rose to meet it from satin cases poured in rich profusion. In vials of ivory and colored glass, unstoppered, lurked her strange synthetic perfumes, unguent, powdered or liquid, troubled, confused, and drowned the scents and odors. Stirred by the air that freshened from the window, these ascended in fattening the prolonged candle flames, flung their smoke into the laquearia, stirring the pattern on the coffered ceiling. Huge seawood, fed with copper, burnt green and orange, framed by the colored stone in which sad light a carved dolphin swam. Above the antique mantel was displayed, as though a window gave upon the sylvan scene, the change of Philomel by the barbarous king so rudely forced. Yet there the nightingale filled all the desert with inviolable voice, and still she cries, and still the world pursues, jug, jug to dirty ears. and other withered stumps of time were told upon the walls. Staring forms leaned out, leaning, hushing the room enclosed. Footsteps shuffled on the stair, under the firelight, under the brush. Her hair spread out into fiery points, glowed into words, and would be savagely still. My nerves are bad tonight. Yes, bad. Stay with me. Speak to me. Why do you never speak? Speak! What are you thinking of? What thinking? Think. I never know what you're thinking. Think! I think we're in Rat's Alley, where the dead men lost their bones. What is that noise? The wind under the door. What is that noise now? What is the wind doing? Nothing. Again, nothing. Do you know nothing? Do you see nothing? Do you remember nothing? I remember those are pearls that were his eyes. Are you alive or not? Is there nothing in your head but, oh, that Shakespearean rag? It's so elegant, so intelligent. What shall I do now? What shall I do? I shall rush out as I am with my hair down so. What shall we do tomorrow? What shall we ever do? The hot water at 10, and if it rains, a closed car at 4. And we shall play a game of chess, pressing lidless eyes and waiting for a knock upon the door. When Liz's husband got demobbed, I said I didn't mince my words. I said to her myself, hurry up, please, it's time. Now Albert's coming back. Make yourself a bit smart. They want to know what you've done with that money he gave you. Get yourself some teeth. He did, I was there. Have them all out, Lil, and get a nice set, he said. I swear, I can't bear to look at you. And no more can't I said. And think of poor Albert. He's been in the army 4 years and wants a good time. And if you don't give it him, there's others will, I said. Oh, is there, she said. Something of it, I said. Then I'll know who to thank, she said, and give me a straight look. Hurry up, please, it's time. Well, if you don't like it, you can get on with it, I said. Others can pick and choose if you can't. But if Albert makes off, it won't be for lack of telling. You ought to be ashamed, I said, to look so antique. And her only 31. I can't help it, she said, pulling a long face. It's them pills I took to bring it off. She's had 5 already and nearly died of young George. The chemist said I'd be all right, but I've never been the same. You are a proper fool, I said. Well, if Albert won't leave you alone, there it is. What'd you get married for if you don't want children? Hurry up, please, it's time. Good night, Belle. Good night, Lou. Good night, May. Ta-ta. Good night, good night. Good night, ladies. Good night, sweet ladies. Good night. Good night. The fire sermon. The river's tent is broken. The last fingers of leaf clutch and sink into the wet bank. The wind crosses the brown land unheard. The nymphs are departed. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. The river bears no empty bottles, sandwich paper, silk handkerchiefs, cardboard boxes, cigarette ends, or other testimony of summer nights. The nymphs are departed. And their friends, the loitering heirs of city directors, departed, have left no addresses. By the waters of Leman I sat down and wept. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. Sweet Thames, run softly, for I speak not loud or long. But at my back, in a cold blast, I hear the rattle of the bones and chuckles spread from ear to ear. A rat crept softly through the vegetation, dragging its slimy belly on the bank, while I was fishing in a dull canal on a winter evening round behind the gas house, musing upon the king, my brother's wreck, and on the king, my father's death before him. White bodies naked on the low, damp ground, and bones cast in a little low, dry garret, rattled by the rat's foot only year to year. But at my back, from time to time, I hear the sound of horns and motors, which shall bring Sweeney to Mrs. Porter in the spring. Oh, the moon shone bright on Mrs. Porter, and on her daughter they washed their feet in soda water. Et au savoir d'enfant, chantant dans le coupole. Twit, 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 jug, 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 so rudely forced. Teru. Unreal city. Under the brown fog of a winter noon, Mr. Eugenides, Smyrna merchant, unshaven with a pocket full of currants, CIF London documents at sight, asked me in demotic French to luncheon at the Cannon Street Hotel, followed by a weekend at the Metropole. At the violet hour, when the eyes and back turn upward from the desk, when the human engine waits like a taxi, throbbing. I, Teresi, as though blind, throbbing between two lives, old man with wrinkled female breasts,
can see. At the violet hour, the evening hour that brings the sailor home from sea. The typist, home at tea time, clears her breakfast, lights her stove, and lays out food in tins. Out of the window perilously spread, her drying combinations touched by the sun's last rays. On the divan are piled, at night her bed, stockings, slippers, camisoles, and stays. And I, Tiresias, old man with wrinkled dugs, perceived the scene and foretold the rest. I, too, awaited the expected guest.
Hey, the young man carbuncular arrives, a small house agent's clerk with one bold stare. One of the low on whom assurance sits as a silk hat on a Bradford millionaire. The time is now propitious as he guesses. The meal is ended, she is bored and tired. Endeavors to engage her in caresses, which still are unreproved if undesired. Flushed and decided, he assaults at once. Exploring hands encounter no defense. His vanity requires no response, and makes a welcome of indifference.
And I, Tiresias, have forsuffered all and acted on this same divan or bed. I who have sat by Thebes below the wall and walked amongst the lowest of the dead.
Bestows one final patronizing kiss, and gropes his way finding the stairs unlit. She turns and looks a moment at the glass, hardly aware of her departed lover. Her brain allows one half-formed thought to pass. Well, now that's done. I'm glad it's over. One lovely woman stoops to folly and paces about her room, again alone. She smooths her hair with automatic hand and puts a record on the gramophone. This music passed by me along the Strand. Up Queen Victoria Street. Oh, city, city, I can sometimes hear beside a public bar on Lower Thames Street the pleasant whining of a mandolin and a clatter and a chatter from within where the fishermen lounge at noon. The walls of Magnus Marta hold inexplicable splendor of Ionian white and gold. The river sweats oil and tar. The barges drift with the turning tide. Red sails wide to leeward swing on the heavy spar. The barges wash drifting logs down Greenwich, reach past the Isle of Dogs. Elizabeth and Leicester beating oars. The stern was formed a gilded shell, red and gold. A brisk swell rippled both shores. Southwest wind carried downstream a peal of bells. White towers. Trams and dusty trees, Highbury bore me. Richmond and Kew undid me. By Richmond, I raised my knees supine on the floor of a narrow canoe. My feet are at Moorgate, and my heart under my feet. After the event, he wept. He promised a new start. I made no comment. What should I resent? On Market Sands, I can connect nothing with nothing. The broken fingernails of dirty hands. My people, humble people, who expect nothing. La la. To Carthage then I came, burning, 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 burning. Oh Lord, thou pluckest me out. Oh Lord, thou pluckest, burning. Death by water. Phlebas the Phoenician, a fortnight dead, forgot the cry of gulls and the deep sea swell and the profit and loss. A current undersea picked his bones in whispers. As he rose and fell, he passed the stages of his age and youth entering the whirlpool. Gentile or Jew, O you who turn the wheel and look to windward, consider Phlebas, who was once handsome and tall as you. Five, what the thunder said. After the torchlight red on sweaty faces, after the frosty silence in the gardens, after the agony in stony places, the shouting and the crying, prison and palace and reverberation of thunder of spring over distant mountains, he who was living is now dead. We who were living are now dying with a little patience. Here is no water, but only rock. Rock and no water in the sandy road, the road winding above among the mountains, which are mountains of rock, without water. If there were water, we could stop and drink. Amongst the rock, one cannot stop and think. Sweat is dry and feet are in the sand. If only there were water amongst the rock. dead mountain mouth of carious teeth. Here one can neither stand nor lie nor sit. There is not even silence in the mountains, but dry, sterile thunder without rain. There is not even solitude in the mountains, but red, sullen faces sneer and snarl from doors of mud-cracked houses. If there were water and no rock, if there were rock and also water, and water, a spring, a pool amongst the rock, if there were the sound of water only, not the cicada and the dry grass singing, but the sound of water over a rock where the hermit thrush sings in the pine trees, drip, chop, drip, chop, 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 chop. But there is no water. Who is the third who walks always beside you? When I look ahead up the road, there is always another standing beside you. But when I look ahead, there is always another. I do not know whether a man or a woman. But who is that on the other side of you? What is the sound high in the mountains? Murmur of maternal lamentations. Who are those hooded hordes swarming over endless plains, stumbling in cracked earth, ringed by the flat horizon only? What is the city high in the mountain? Cracks and reforms and bursts in the violet light. Falling towers. Jerusalem, Athens, Alexandria, Vienna, London. Unreal. A woman drew her long black hair out tight and fiddled whisper music on those strings. And bats with baby faces whistled and beat their wings and crawled head downward down a blackened wall. And upside down in air were towers tolling reminiscent bells that kept the hours, and voices singing out of empty cisterns and exhausted wells. In this decayed hole among the mountains, the grass is singing about the tumbled graves, about the chapel. There is the chapel, only the wind's home. It has no windows and the door swings. Dry bones can harm no one. Only a cock stood on a roof tree. Cocorico, cocorico, in a flash of lightning, then a damp gust bringing rain. Ganga was sunken, and the limp leaves waited for rain as the black clouds gathered far distant over Himavant. The jungle crouched, humped in silence. Then spoke the thunder. Da, Datta, what have we given? My friend, blood shaking my heart, the awful daring of a moment's surrender, which an age of prudence can never retract. By this, and this only we have existed, which is not to be found in our obituaries, or in memories draped by the beneficent spider, or under seals broken by the lean solicitor in our empty rooms. Da, Dayadvam. I heard the key turn in the door once, and turn once only. We think of the key, each in his prison, thinking of the key. Each confirms a prison. Only at nightfall, ethereal rumors revive for a moment. A broken Coriolanus. Da, Damyata. The boat responded gaily to the hand, expert in sail and oar. The sea was calm. Your heart would have responded gaily when invited, beating obedient to controlling hands. I sat upon the shore, fishing with the arid plain behind me. Shall I at least set my lands in order? London Bridge is falling down, falling down. Puis così nel fuoco c'è glina fina. Quando fiammuticella danno swallow, swallow. Le plans d'Acotin à la Torah brûlée. These fragments I have shored against my ruin. Well, then I'll fit you, Hieronymo's mad again! Datta! Dayadvam! Damyada! Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you. Well, that was fun. I didn't sort of plan anything after this moment. So does anyone want to ask questions about any of this? Something wrong with your heart, Jeff?
So how did you assign different voices to different sections of the poem?
A lot of times, reading it over and over again, I reserve some of them for when I perform them to be different, to try to do something different each time. This one I think I did a little bit differently with the kind of sailor guy, the Royal Sweat, Soil, and Tar. There was one point where it's Tiresias, that's a long section, where then there's that sort of, there's a point where he's saying, I'm going to see what the future is. And then there's sort of a voice in there about what this future is going to be. And I didn't know how to distinguish it. And so I decided to try this radio announcer approach and to see if that would work, just to sort of distinguish it for myself. And I seem to like that. So, yeah, Neil.
Did you use a particular technique to do the memorization? Or?
No. In fact, I really found the poem so hard to read that I would memorize in a wave, not having actually read to the end of the play. And so I could memorize it, and then I would do it over and over and over again, and then work my way towards it. But it's just repetition, observations.
About, repeating it to
Oh,
James.
yeah. So this was in the early 90s, and I would practice it whenever I possibly could. In fact, my son was born in 92, and I would recite it to him while he was going to sleep.
As a bedtime story.
And, he didn't seem to mind. In fact, occasionally, more than occasionally, I would fall asleep first, and he would sort of, Daddy, wake up. What about
Good
night, ladies? What happens after good night,
You
ladies?
didn't finish.
And then we picked him up from day school once, and preschool, and his teacher came and asked about James if he was all right. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, well, he was sitting in the sand pile with a bunch of other kids and started giggling to himself, and then grabbed a bunch of sand and put it into another kid's face and said, I'll show you fear in a handful of dust. Which they didn't actually find funny. So, yeah, Bob.
Does this have anything to do with his choice of profession?
I have no idea.
Might definitely. He's studying theater now.
Yeah.
He's a Shakespeare fanatic.
So, well, thank you so much. I had so much fun presenting it to you guys, and I zoomed through it, so I must have been going at 100 miles an hour, but I was mostly afraid of missing something or getting stuck, but didn't. So, if you want to stick around and ask questions, that's great. Otherwise, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.